Welcome to today's historical deep dive into the dust, straw, and bone of the past, under the quiet gaze of sleepy history. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. We peel back the layers of parchment and stone to find the pulse of real life, not the crowns and castles, but the ache in the back, the prayer whispered into the dark earth, the sheer, stubborn refusal to be extinguished. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know, ensuring these echoes reach further. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Would you be a farmer, a midwife, a questionable healer, or perhaps meet an early unremarked end? Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. You wake before the sun, not to an alarm, but to the raw ache in your belly and the insistent crowing of a neighbor's rooster, a sound as reliable as hunger itself. The air in your small hut is thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke that didn't quite escape through the smoke hole, staining the air and your lungs, and the stale straw you share with the few precious chickens, whose warmth is a fleeting comfort. Your limbs protest the cold that seeps into your bones from the hard-packed floor, a constant, low-grade pain you no longer consciously notice, only feel. Outside, the wind whistles through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls, a constant reminder of your vulnerability, the thin barrier between you and the indifferent bite of nature. Every breath is shallow, conserving heat, conserving energy, a tiny economy of the body. The thought of the day's endless labor stretches before you, daunting in its sameness and the ever-present risk of failure. A blight that could wither the grain before it's ripe. A sudden storm that flattens the meager crop. A sickness that could cripple your family and condemn them to starvation before the next spring even whispers its promise. You reach for the rough-spun tunic you wore yesterday, its stiffness, a familiar discomfort against your skin. Scratchy wool against skin, hardened by work and weather. This isn't just waking, it's resurfacing from a brief, fragile sleep into a world where survival is a daily, brutal negotiation, a transaction where the currency is sweat and fear. You don't question why you must face this. It simply is the rhythm of existence, etched into the very land you depend upon, bound by duties to lords and the whims of heaven. The existential truth is laid bare before you've even stood upright. Life is a relentless struggle against forces far larger than yourself. Nature in its raw, untamed power. The landlord whose demands can strip you bare. And the unseen hand of fate, guided perhaps by saints, perhaps by devils, deciding who lives and who perishes. Your identity is not one of personal ambition, of grand dreams or individual achievement, but of sheer, dogged endurance. You are a link in a chain, defined by your ability to survive and continue. It's a stark contrast to the cushioned awakenings of today, where warmth, light, and food are often taken for granted. a safety net, woven so subtly, you forget it exists. Would your modern self even lift your head from the straw, knowing the weight of this day, the certainty of pain and uncertainty? The first test isn't the work waiting outside. It's the will to rise at all, to choose another day of this grinding reality. You rise. There is no other choice. You wake in darkness, the fire cold. The smoke still clings to everything, a constant reminder that home is not a fortress, but a shared lung, breathing in time with the elements. This single room is your universe from dusk till dawn, shared not just with the gentle breathing of your spouse and children, but with the rustle of chickens seeking shelter from the night chill, or the occasional bleating of a lamb pulled indoors against a coming storm. The walls are woven branches, slim and yielding, plastered with mud and dung that cracks in the dry air and oozes faintly in the damp. The roof, thatched with straw or reeds, is a living thing itself, harboring insects and spiders, sometimes dripping a cold bead onto a straw pallet below when the rain is heavy enough to defeat its layers. There is no glass here, no framed view of the world outside. The only opening is the doorway, covered by a hide or a woven mat, barely more than a suggestion of a barrier against the wind, the rain, or the red eyes of a hungry fox drawn by the smell of the hearth. The hearth itself, a simple pit of stones in the center of the floor, is the dwelling's beating heart. By day, it might smolder with cooking embers. By night, its flame is the sole source of light and warmth, casting dancing shadows that swallow the corners of the room and painting everything in shades of orange and black. The smoke has no chimney, only a hole in the roof, if you're lucky, or simply nowhere to go but out through the weave of the thatch and the cracks in the walls, coating the rough table, the few earthenware pots, the simple tools, everything you own, in a fine, gritty layer of soot. Possessions are pitiably few by modern eyes. Perhaps a wooden chest that serves as a bench or storage, straw pallets scattered for sleeping near the dwindling warmth, tools worn smooth by use, a shared wool blanket against the biting cold. Privacy is a concept as foreign as a gilded coach. Every sound, every scent, every physical reality of life, a child's feverish cough cutting through the night, the low murmur of a spouse's prayer, the undeniable intimacy of shared bodies pressed together for warmth, even arguments that flare and fade like embers. All of it happens in the unavoidable presence of others. You are utterly exposed, not just to the biting wind seeping through the walls, but to the raw, unvarnished existence of your family. This constant, inescapable closeness, this profound lack of personal space, forged a bond within these walls as tough and twisted as the branches that made them. Survival wasn't just a personal struggle. It depended absolutely on the cooperation, tolerance, and reliance on those sharing your small, smoky world. The sickness of one threatened all. The warmth of the fire belonged to everyone. It forces a melancholic question. Does our modern world, with its separate rooms, locked doors, and personal boundaries, give us privacy at the cost of this fundamental, visceral connection. Was there crowded resilience, born of necessity and shared hardship, a different kind of strength entirely? One we have perhaps forgotten how to forge? The superstition that evil spirits cannot cross a threshold where a family prays together by the hearth feels less like baseless fear and more like an understanding of this truth. Your best protection is the bond of blood and shared smoke. The taste of the morning pottage is the taste of endurance. It is the same taste as yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. A thin, watery gruel, boiled grains, barley or oats, salvaged from what wasn't taken by the Lord, what wasn't needed for next year's seed. It is fuel, not pleasure. It sits heavy and dull in your belly, a temporary truce with the constant, gnawing ache. You scrape the wooden bowl clean with your finger, licking the last remnants. Waste is a sin you cannot afford. This is the grinding wheel of hunger. It turns every moment of your waking life, dictating your energy, limiting your thought to the immediate necessity of finding the next few calories. Bread, when you have it, feels like a miracle. Coarse, dark, hard-baked in the communal oven, it represents successful harvest, careful storage, negotiation with the powers that be. You chew it slowly, savoring its rough texture, its earthy taste. This isn't the airy fluff of a lord's table. It is compressed sunlight and toil. A monument to sheer human effort. Meat is a ghost, whispered about in dreams or glimpsed on feast days, the rare, glorious abundance provided by the manor, or the desperate gamble of a poached rabbit, the punishment for which is severe, often brutal, reflecting how precious even the smallest creature is to those who own the land. Hunger is your most intimate companion. It dulls your senses, making the world seem muted, the vibrant colors of a summer field seen through a haze of fatigue. It makes your limbs heavy, your movements slow. It shapes your prayers, pleas for a good harvest, thanks for the thin soup, fear of crop blight attributed to curses or divine displeasure. It dictates your morality. A stray hen, a dropped apple from an orchard edge, these become temptations that pit your empty belly against your fear of being caught, of being branded a thief by neighbors as hungry as you. The surprising truth is how this relentless need for food fosters a strange, wary interdependence. You might share a handful of peas with a sick neighbor, knowing that the wheel could turn, and tomorrow you might be the one with nothing. Feast days, these rare explosions of calories, ale, and roasted meat, are not just holidays. They are physical rescues, moments of pure animal relief that sear themselves into memory, islands of plenty in a sea of lack. Compared to the mountains of discarded food in the world to come, your relationship with sustenance is one of brutal necessity and profound gratitude. Every bite is earned, fought for against the elements, the feudal system, and the unpredictability of life itself. Could you truly appreciate the taste of plain bread, the simple warmth of boiled grain, if you had not known the hunger that precedes it? If your dreams weren't filled with images of food you'd never taste? It teaches a respect that borders on reverence, a knowledge of the earth and its reluctant gifts that modern ease has all but erased. Your life is dictated by the rhythms of the soil and the seasons, not by any clock you own, for you own none. The sun is your timepiece, your aching body the machine. Spring arrives not with gentle breezes, but with the biting chill still clinging to the damp earth, signaling the brutal necessity of breaking ground. You stand behind the plow, a heavy, unwieldy contraption of wood, sometimes tipped with iron, if you are fortunate enough to pool resources with neighbors or serve a lord who provides. Often, though, you are simply one more straining back beside the beasts, oxen or even your own kin, tethered with rough rope, pulling against the resistant soil. The ground gives way grudgingly, turning over dark, rich clods that promise future life, but demand current agony. It is backbreaking work, requiring brute strength you didn't know you possessed until this task demanded it. You feel the pull deep in your shoulders, the burn in your legs, the sting of blisters already forming on hands, calloused but never truly hardened enough for this relentless scrape against the world. Summer arrives like a hammer blow, not offering ease, but a different kind of relentless toil. The green shoots emerge, tiny miracles that must be protected fiercely. Weeding is an endless, stooping battle against nature's competing will. Your fingers scrabble in the dirt, pulling, tearing, discarding, praying the good plants thrive. But always, always, your eyes are on the sky. A cloudless blue means searing drought, the soil cracking, the precious seedlings wilting under the sun's malevolent glare. Dark, swollen clouds bring fear of hailstones, stones from the sky that can flatten a season's hope in minutes, or floods that will drown the roots and wash away the topsoil painstakingly won. Every gust of wind, every change in temperature is fraught with the potential for disaster. You live tethered to the elements, a puppet of the weather's unpredictable moods. It's a stark lesson in humility. No matter your effort, a single storm can erase it all. This constant, low-grade fear is a gnawing hunger in your gut, distinct from the physical emptiness. Autumn, the harvest. This is the frantic climax of the year, a race against time before the rains come and rot the grain where it stands. Armed with only a small, curved sickle, you move down the rows, bending, slicing, gathering bundles of stalks. The repetitive motion becomes a numb ritual, but your back screams with every twist, and your hands bleed from the rough stubble and the unyielding grip on the tool. Hours bleed into days, sunup to sundown, fueled by desperation and thin gruel. Children help where they can, gathering fallen stalks, but the bulk of the labor falls to the adults, bodies pushed past endurance. Once cut, the bundles must be carried, stacked, threshed to separate grain from straw. A dusty, rhythmic beating, often done communally in a barn or threshing floor. Then comes the winnowing, tossing the threshed material into the wind, hoping the breeze carries away the lighter chaff, leaving the heavier, life-giving grain to fall back down. It is a precarious dance with the air, a final act of faith after months of struggle. You watch the grain pile grow, a visible measure of your survival, a fragile buffer against the coming lean months. Winter offers little respite. The fields lie fallow, sleeping under frost or snow. But work does not cease. Tools broken during the year's fury must be mended, wooden handles replaced, plowshares hammered back into shape if you know a smith or can borrow time at his forge. Animals must be tended constantly, fed and sheltered, their warmth a vital resource. Wood must be chopped, split, and hauled to fuel the hearth fire that is your only defense against the penetrating cold. And always the constant gnawing worry of the meager stores running out before the spring thaw. You count the sacks of grain, measure the dried provisions, stretching them thinner and thinner as the weeks drag on. This is manual labor in its rawest form, utterly dependent on brute strength, resilience, and the essential cooperation of neighbors for tasks like the heavy plowing or the communal threshing. There is no separation between work and life. Your existence is this labor. The dignity of work wasn't an abstract concept discussed in hushed tones. It was the practical, essential act of coaxing life from the earth, of ensuring another year of survival for your family and community. Every aching muscle, every blistered hand, every bead of sweat dripping onto the soil is a testament to your participation in the fundamental human struggle to provide. It makes you look at the comfortable automation and detached desk jobs of the future you will never see, and wonder what connection to the tangible world has been lost. Do those hands that only manipulate symbols on a screen truly understand the value of the bread they eat when they have never coaxed the wheat from the ground with their own strain? Ask yourself, if your survival depended utterly on the yield of a small patch of ground, would the sun feel like a friend or a relentless overseer? Would you pray for rain or fear the storm? The rising sun, barely a promise of warmth, finds you already stooped, back aching before the day has truly begun. This earth, the rich, dark soil clinging to your rough-spun tunic, feels like your own, feels like it knows your touch, your sweat, the generations of your family who have coaxed life from it. Yet it is not yours. You work it, yes, but the very ground beneath your calloused hands belongs to the feudal lord who resides in the distant stone house on the rise. Or perhaps a cold, imposing castle miles away. Your existence is a thread woven into the fabric of his will, dictated by the ancient customs of the manor, traditions as old and unyielding as the oak trees on the boundary. The harvest, when it finally comes, is the fruit of your tireless labor, the fragile hope against the long, hungry winter. But before you can even think of storing enough for your own family's survival, you must set aside the best portion, the plumpest grain, the finest sheaves, as rent for the Lord. You haul it away, a physical symbol of your subservience, watching a part of your own life's blood disappear up the track towards the manor house. And the demands do not end there. Before you can tend your own small strips of land, before you can mend your own fences or clear your own ditches, you owe days, often many days, working on the Lord's domain, cultivating His fields, ensuring His barns are full. Your stomach may rumble with emptiness. Your own patch may cry out for attention, but the Lord's work comes first. This constant obligation, this physical servitude feels less like rent and more like the price of being allowed to breathe the manor's air. Even the simplest necessities require His permission and carry a cost. When your grain is ready, you cannot grind it yourself. You must carry the heavy sacks to the Lord's mill, paying a fee for the privilege of using His stones. The aroma of baking bread, the very scent of survival, comes from His oven, for which you pay another fee. These are not communal resources built for shared benefit, but tools of control, instruments of dependency. You are tethered to this land, not by love or ownership, but by law and custom. You are a serf. Leaving the manor without the Lord's explicit permission is not merely frowned upon, it is forbidden, punishable, a breaking of the bonds that define your place in the world. In the manorial court, held perhaps under the old oak or in the draughty hall, the Lord's reeve, or even the Lord Himself, sits in judgment. Disputes over stray livestock, inheritance customs, minor trespasses, they are all settled here. His word, not some abstract concept of justice or individual rights, is the law. You have obligations, duties, responsibilities. The idea of personal freedoms, as you might understand them today, simply does not exist. This might seem an unbearable burden, a crushing weight of authority. And yet, there is a brutal simplicity to it, a form of security. When raiders appear like a sudden storm, or when a neighboring lord casts a hungry eye upon your lands, the Lord is expected to offer protection, His men-at-arms, your only shield. In the leanest years, when the harvest fails and the specter of starvation looms, the Lord might, if He is just or simply wishes to preserve His labor force, open His granaries, offering a meager handout. It is a rigid hierarchy, yes, defining your place from the moment you draw your first breath, but it also provides a structure, a predictable, albeit harsh, world. The insight here is unsettling. We chafe under unseen authorities today, corporations, governments, digital systems, but few experience the direct, personal, almost familial control of a feudal lord. Our modern freedom feels absolute, yet does it come with a trade-off in communal security? A loss of that immediate, albeit harsh, protective layer? Ask yourself, could you trade the illusion of absolute freedom for the promise, however fragile, of protection and a guaranteed patch of earth? Would you bend your knee to the Lord's will, or would the yearning for a different life gnaw at your soul until there was nothing left but dust? The weight of the beam is too much for one family, too much for two. You grunt, muscles straining, standing shoulder to shoulder with your neighbor, your brother, your cousin. The timbers groan into place, slotting into the frame of young Elsbeth's new cottage. Hers burned in the spring fire, started by old Manford's wandering spark. But no one blames Manford for long. Today, you build. You don't survive alone here. The village is the crucible of your existence. A dense web of family, neighbors, and shared necessity. Plowing a field, building a hut, bringing in the harvest. These tasks often require collective effort. You share oxen, tools, knowledge, and burdens. If your thatch roof blows off in a gale, you wake to find neighbors already climbing ladders, their hands calloused and ready. If you fall ill, the community might help tend your fields, knowing that next season you might do the same for them. There is no grand contract, no signed agreement, just the silent, ironclad understanding that you are all in this together. Disputes are common, amplified by the constant proximity and lack of privacy. The cow that trampled your vegetables, the fence post moved a foot too far, the harsh words spoken at the well. These small frictions are life. But resolution, or at least containment, is essential for survival. An ongoing feud starves everyone. Feast days and village gatherings are not mere celebrations. They are vital moments of shared identity, reinforcing bonds, airing grievances indirectly through song or jest, and transmitting tradition. Everyone knows your history, your character, your family's strengths and weaknesses. Old Thomas knows your father cheated at dice 20 years ago. Young Mary knows your sister secretly longs for a life beyond the fields. The social pressure to conform, to contribute, and to uphold community norms is immense. To step too far outside the pattern, to be too different, is to risk the subtle withdrawal of goodwill, and goodwill is lifeblood. This intense interdependence is the defining feature of medieval village life. Individualism is secondary to the survival of the collective. Your dreams, your private thoughts matter little compared to your ability to pull your weight, to fit the mold the community requires for its own fragile continuation. We live in a society that celebrates independence and personal space, often at the expense of deep community ties. We lock our doors, we barely know our neighbors, we curate our identities for distant audiences. Are we more free, or simply more isolated? Could you navigate a world where your survival literally depended on the goodwill and cooperation of your neighbors? Where every mistake was witnessed, every weakness known, and privacy was a luxury you could not even conceive? Ask yourself, was their lack of choice a prison, or a different kind of strength? Was conforming to the village less about losing yourself and more about finding the only way to be? The bells of the stone church mark the hours, not just of the day, but of your very existence. They are the voice of God in the valley, a constant reminder that life is lived under His watchful eye and the shadow of the unseen world. The church building itself isn't just stones and wood. It's the anchor point of your spiritual, social, and sometimes even political life. You shuffle through the worn doorway for Mass, joining your neighbors in the familiar press of bodies. The priest speaks in Latin, a language you only partly grasp through the rhythm and repetition. But the rituals are ingrained: the sign of the cross, the kneeling on cold flags, the rare hushed moment of receiving communion. This is the formal path to grace, the promise of salvation in a brutal world. Saints are not distant figures in painted windows. They are immediate, powerful allies. Saint Sebastian against the plague, Saint Anthony against fire, Saint Apollonia against toothache. You petition them directly, lighting a small candle if you can afford it, clutching a worn medal, hoping for their intercession against the specific dangers that constantly threaten your fragile life. Relics, a fragment of bone, a piece of cloth touched by a holy person, hold tangible power, drawing pilgrims and offering hope that holiness can be transferred, can somehow rub off on you. But this divine shield is porous, constantly threatened by the pervasive fear of the devil and his countless demons. They are blamed for everything: the sudden fever that takes a child, the blight that withers the grain, the nagging temptation to steal bread. The world is a spiritual battlefield where your immortal soul is the ultimate prize. Every unexplained event is interpreted through this lens. A cow goes barren? Cursed. A storm destroys the roof. Demonic interference. This deep superstition is woven indistinguishably with formal doctrine. You might pray to St. Giles for protection from evil, but you also hang a cluster of blessed herbs over the door and tie a knotted string around your wrist. Rituals, formal blessings from the priest, and ancient folk charms stand side by side, all employed to ward off unseen malice and court precarious good fortune. This intricate blend of official faith and personal magic isn't contradictory. It's a necessary framework for understanding a chaotic and unpredictable existence. It offers solace, the hope of divine aid or a saint's help, but also terror, the constant threat of damnation or demonic attack. It speaks to something fundamental about humanity. Our desperate need to find meaning, causality, and control in the face of the unknown. While we now turn to science, reason, and therapy, we still crave narratives, belief systems, and coping mechanisms when faced with uncertainty, illness, and loss. What do we put our faith in now to ward off our deepest, oldest fears? The wind bites through the thin wool, carrying the smell of damp earth and something else, something stagnant. It's the smell of sickness, or maybe just the ever-present edge of the grave. You've seen death many times. It's not a visitor here. It lives down the lane, across the field, sometimes right in your own home. Infants often die before their first birthday, tiny bundles gone silent before they even learn to walk. Children succumb to fevers that burn them from the inside, coughs that steal their breath, or sudden chills that no fire can warm. Adults can be taken swiftly by illness that swells the belly or rots the flesh, by a falling branch, a slip with an axe, or for women, the terrifying ordeal of childbirth. There is little understanding of why bodies fail. Explanations cling to the air like the smoke from the peat fires. It's often blamed on bad air, on imbalances within the body's humors, or most fearfully, on divine displeasure for sins unknown. The village healer, often an elderly woman like Alara, with eyes that have seen too much and hands gnarled from herbs, uses remedies passed down through generations. Crushed plantain for a cut, a poultice of herbs for a fever, charms whispered over a sickbed, prayers mumbled with desperate hope. Sometimes they seem to work. Often, heartbreakingly, they do not. There are no doctors as you would know them, no stone buildings filled with the sick, no understanding of invisible creatures called germs, or the need for clean hands. A simple cut can fester into a black line marching up an arm, leading inevitably to the charnel house. A fever, even a slight one, can be a death sentence that chills the blood more than any winter night. Life expectancy is low, a brutal calculation against the relentless odds of infection, starvation, and accident. Yet if you survive the gauntlet of childhood, avoiding the reaper's early scythe, you might live into your 40s or 50s. But living becomes a different struggle then, as age quickly makes the brutal physical labor impossible. This constant proximity to death shapes your perspective in ways modern comfort cannot fathom. Life is precious because it is so precarious. There is a profound acceptance of mortality, a quiet nod to the inevitable end that frees you to focus on the here and now, the warmth of the fire, the taste of bread, the brief, fleeting health of your loved ones, and the fervent hope of salvation in the next life. It makes you confront our modern aversion to death, our frantic medical attempts to prolong life at all costs, sometimes long past comfort or consciousness. Do we truly gain comfort from pushing death away, locking it behind hospital doors and medical machines? Or do we lose a vital perspective on the immediate, fragile value of the life we have today? Could you live, truly live, knowing death was always, quietly, around the corner, not a distant abstract, but a potential visitor at any moment? The air itself feels thicker, layered with the history of breath and labor. It carries the sharp tang of wood smoke from the hearth, the sweet, damp scent of earth clinging to boots and clothing, and the ever-present, musky odor of nearby animals. Pigs rooting in the yard, cattle lowing from their byre, chickens scratching dust. This is the honest scent of living, unfiltered and inescapable. Cleanliness, as you understand it now, is a foreign concept, an impossible luxury. A bath is not a daily ritual. It is a significant event, perhaps taken only a few times a year. If you are fortunate, there might be a shared wooden tub in a village. Heated water a precious commodity, requiring fuel and effort. More likely, in the heat of summer, you might strip off a layer by a clear stream, dipping yourself quickly, the cold water a shock to the skin, washing away only the top layer of accumulated dirt and sweat. The water itself is hard-won, carried bucket by bucket from the village well or a distant stream, heavy and finite. Every drop used for washing a body or a garment is a drop that cannot water the garden, hydrate the animals, or quench thirst. This scarcity dictates life. Water is for necessity, and mere comfort ranks low on that brutal scale. Laundry is an epic task. Imagine hours spent by the stream or a large cauldron, beating tough homespun linen and wool with paddles, using harsh, homemade lye soap that burns the skin if you're not careful. It happens infrequently, maybe once a month or even less often in the colder seasons, when water is icy and drying impossible. The clothes you wear feel heavy, carrying the history of days, absorbing the smells of your labor, your environment, your very being. They are worn until they are truly foul, or until the workload permits the monumental effort of washing. And the pests. Lice are not a moral failing. They are simply there. Fleas jump from straw beds and animal hides. You learn to scratch, to pick, to live with the constant, low-grade irritation. Children have them. Adults have them. It is part of the background static of life, like the distant bleating of sheep or the ring of the blacksmith's hammer. You don't have the means, the knowledge, or frankly, the time or energy to wage war on these tiny invaders. They are accepted. Another facet of the world you inhabit. Inside your home, dust motes dance in the rare shafts of sunlight. Floors are often packed earth or rough stone, strewn with rushes that are changed periodically when they become too soiled and flattened, offering a small, temporary respite from the grime. Waste disposal is rudimentary at best. Food scraps go to the animals or the compost heap just outside the door. Human waste might be collected in a privy if you're in a town or wealthier household. But in a simple village, it's often a matter of finding a discreet spot outdoors, adding to the microbial landscape around the dwelling. The concept of sanitation is tied to immediate, visible nuisance, not invisible pathogens. Yet astonishingly, people weren't constantly incapacitated by sickness in the way we might anticipate with our modern germ-aware minds. This isn't because medieval muck was somehow cleaner. It was simply different. It was likely because generations had developed a degree of communal immunity to the pathogens commonly circulating in their environment. Those who survive the high infant mortality rates, the childhood diseases, the constant threats of infection from cuts and scrapes, possessed robust, though constantly challenged, immune systems. It was a brutal form of selective pressure. The very dirt they lived amongst might have inoculated survivors against later, more severe exposures. This forces a stark comparison to our own time. Our homes are sealed environments, our bodies constantly washed, sanitized, deodorized. We live in a state of near sterility compared to the medieval reality. Is our obsession with germ killing a triumph of health or a different kind of vulnerability? Have we outsourced our natural immunities to chemicals and clean water, leaving ourselves perhaps less resilient to the simple, unfiltered reality of microbial life? Their standards were born of absolute practicality and resource constraint. Ours are born of comfort, convenience, and a deep-seated description, almost phobic fear of the unseen world of microbes. They focused on surviving the winter, the famine, the immediate threat. We focus on eliminating risk down to the microscopic level. Ask yourself, could you tolerate the raw, unfiltered scent of medieval existence? Could you breathe that air? Live in that skin? Accept the dirt and the pests as simply the fabric of your days? Or would the very smell of it break you? The rough wool scratches against your skin as you pull the tunic over your head. The linen shift underneath is thin, worn soft with countless washings in the cold stream. These are your clothes. This is your identity made visible. For you, a man of the fields, it's this simple tunic, perhaps breeches tied with cord, maybe rough leather wraps around your feet if you're lucky enough to own shoes. For your wife, it's a long shift and an outer dress, a veil or wimple covering her hair, not for modesty as much as for practical necessity, keeping dust and dirt out. Look at the colors: muted browns, greens from pounded leaves, the undyed gray or cream of the wool itself. There are no vibrant blues or reds here. Those require expensive dyes you will never touch. These garments were not bought in a market, unless they were hand-me-downs or scraps. They were born from the land itself. The wool shorn from your own few scraggly sheep, perhaps spun by your wife's tireless fingers late into the night, woven on a simple loom. They are handmade, yes, but not with flair or decoration. Every stitch is for purpose, every seam built to last. There is no new season for you. There are only seasons of wear. A tear in the sleeve isn't a reason to discard. It's a summons to mend. Patches bloom on knees and elbows, layers upon layers of repair, until the original fabric is almost lost beneath the history of its mending. These clothes are worn until they are little more than threadbare rags, passed down until they literally disintegrate into dust. This permanence is not a virtue. It is the stark reality of survival. Every scrap of cloth holds value. There is no fashion here, no changing styles to chase. Your clothing is a uniform, instantly declaring your place in the world. The weave, the quality of the wool, the presence or absence of certain accessories, it all marks you as a peasant, tied to the soil. A noble's elaborate silk and fur are as foreign to you as a journey to the Holy Land. Your worth is not in your appearance, not in the cloth on your back, but in the strength of your arms, the sweat on your brow, your ability to coax food from stubborn earth. In a world drowning in disposable garments and curated personal styles, consider this quiet truth. Identity was rooted not in how you looked, but in what you did, your role in the community, your relationship to the land and its rhythms. These few, simple garments were your skin, your shield against the elements, your visible destiny. What would it feel like to wear the same few pieces, day in and day out, for years, knowing they represented the entirety of your worldly identity? Was there a freedom in this enforced simplicity, or merely another chain forged by necessity and circumstance? These worn threads carried the weight of a life defined by labor, not liberation through choice. They were the quiet, persistent legacy of a people measured not by their appearance, but by their enduring function. The usual dull ache in your back is forgotten today. A different kind of energy hums through the muddy lanes. It's a feast day, a name spoken with reverence throughout the year. A shimmering mirage on the horizon of endless toil. The fields lie quiet, the loom is silent, the tools rest by the wall. The air itself feels lighter, tinged with anticipation. You gather on the village green, not in your work clothes, but in something slightly less worn. Perhaps even a splash of faded color someone managed to save from a better time. The smell hits you first. Wood smoke, yes, always wood smoke, but mixed now with something richer, something almost forgotten. Meat roasting on a spit. Perhaps a scrawny chicken, or if the Lord is generous or the hunt was blessed, a deer. There is the earthy scent of cheese, the sharp tang of pickled vegetables, and the overwhelming, comforting aroma of fresh-baked bread. And then the drink. Ale flows freely today, thick and cloudy, loosening tongues and inhibitions that are usually bound tight by fear and exhaustion. Cider, too, if the apple harvest was kind. You drink deeply, the warmth spreading through you, chasing away the gnawing hunger and the constant chill. Then the music starts. Simple, yes. A battered fiddle, a pipe carved from bone, the rhythmic thump of a drum made from stretched hide. But it's music. It makes your feet tap, your body sway. Soon the dancing begins. Not the formal, intricate dances of the Lord's court, but earthy, stomping, whirling circles on the grass. Old women holding hands with young men. Children mimicking the steps of their parents. Laughter rings out, loud and unrestrained, a sound as rare and precious as the meat on the spit. Stories are told, jokes are shared, grievances momentarily forgotten under the influence of drink and shared joy. Weddings, births, these moments too are elevated into community celebrations, anchors of hope in a sea of uncertainty. These are not lavish affairs. There are no glittering jewels, no imported spices, unless perhaps a tiny pinch saved for a special dish. The better food might still be meager by modern standards, but the intensity of the feeling is immense. It is magnified precisely by the relentless, monotonous grind of the days that flank it. This rare peak of collective revelry isn't just fun, it is a vital release valve. It vents the pressure built up by constant labor, fear of famine, and the shadow of sickness. It reinforces the bonds that hold this fragile community together, reminding everyone why they endure, why they must rely on one another. It is a profound, almost desperate assertion of life in the face of pervasive hardship and death. This teaches us a brutal truth. The human spirit's capacity for finding light is not extinguished by darkness, but often illuminated by it. The joy is not a gentle flicker, but a brief, blinding flare against the encroaching night. Ask yourself, does the constant availability of entertainment and pleasure in our world diminish the depth of simple joys? Could you cherish a single day of dancing and ale on a village green more deeply than a week of modern leisure, precisely because it is so rare, so hard-won? Was this fleeting happiness enough to sustain them through the crushing reality? The bailiff calls out, his voice cutting through the low hum of worried whispers and shuffling feet gathered outside the open-air court, perhaps under a common ancient oak or in the manor house hall if the weather bites. This is where small hurts and large grudges come to be aired, where the fabric of village life is mended or sometimes torn further. Today it's the matter of Alara's hen, found dead near Thomas's barn. Thomas claiming it was a fox. Alara weeping that Thomas's dog was seen lurking. You stand among the dozen or so men called as suitors or jurors, bound by custom to attend and bear witness. The Lord's steward presides, a man who knows your face, your family, your fields, and most likely, your small failings. Justice here isn't found in dusty tomes or abstract laws whispered by faraway clerks. It resides in the shared memory of the community, in the weight of testimony from neighbors who know you, who have seen you work, pray, and quarrel. Did Thomas pay back the flour he borrowed last autumn? Is Alara known to let her chickens roam too far? These unspoken histories weigh heavily. The steward listens, but the real judgment comes from the faces around you, the nods or shakes of heads. Your life is an open book to these people. There is nowhere to hide the truth or the lie for long. This constant scrutiny, this perpetual state of being known, is the invisible boundary wall of your life. The steward renders his judgment. Perhaps Thomas is fined a few pence, or ordered to give Alara 2 of his own hens. It could be a more severe case, a theft, a brawl spilling blood, met with public shaming in the stocks, the jeers and rotten vegetables, a searing reminder of transgression. For minor offenses, the punishment is often designed not just to penalize, but to restore balance, to force the wrongdoer back into the acceptable rhythm of village life. A fine paid in barley or labor hurts, yes, but the sting of disapproval from those you break bread with, who will see your shame every day, is a far sharper, more lasting pain. Your reputation is your fragile shield in this world. Once chipped, it's near impossible to mend. Consider the weight of that. Your actions are immediately and publicly judged by the very people whose cooperation you need to survive the harvest, the plague, the winter. There is no anonymity to soften the blow of consequence. The knowledge that your every step is watched, your character constantly assessed by your peers, is a powerful, relentless force. It shapes your choices in a way modern, distant justice systems cannot replicate. Ask yourself, could you live knowing that the people who depend on you and on whom you depend are your constant jury, your living conscience, holding your life in their gaze? Does our comfort in anonymity come at the cost of that immediate, shared accountability, that visceral connection between action and community response? She wails, a tiny, reedy sound barely heard above the wind, whistling through the gaps in the wattle and daub wall. Beside you, your mother rocks, her eyes hollowed pits of grief. The swaddled bundle in her arms is still, blessedly still. Another summer faded before it truly bloomed. This is the constant drumbeat of your early years, the silence that follows a cough, The swiftness with which a fever takes a sibling, a cousin, a neighbor. The village bell tolls again, a mournful rhythm, measured in tiny losses. If you survive, you are precious. But that preciousness is measured not just in love, but in utility. Childhood, as the scribes might one day write of a future age, is not a protected garden of discovery. It is a brief, precarious summer that ends almost before it begins. By the time your legs are sturdy enough to carry a small load, by the time your fingers can grasp a stick, your working life has already begun. 5 years, 6 years, you are no longer just a mouth to feed, a warmth in the shared straw bed. You are a pair of hands. You learn the rhythm of the house, not from lessons, but from necessity. Your first chore might be watching the younger ones, a constant, anxious task where a moment's inattention near the fire or the well could mean tragedy. You are sent to the woods to gather fallen branches for the fire, your small arms struggling with a bundle heavier than you are. You learn to scare away the birds and vermin from the precious grain sprouts, shouting and waving arms until your throat is raw. Formal learning is a luxury for clerks and nobles, something whispered about in distant monasteries. Your education is in the field, the byre, the hearth. You learn the feel of the earth, the smell of rain on dry soil, the weight of a full pail. You learn the names of the saints who might ward off sickness, the phases of the moon that guide the planting, the superstitions tied to crows and spilled salt. You learn to read the sky, not letters. You learn numbers by counting livestock, fingers, days until harvest. Play exists, yes, but it's often a mirror of the adult world. You mimic plowing with sticks, knead mud into tiny loaves, or chase each other in games that are just practice for running from danger or fetching needed things. There are simple toys carved from wood or fashioned from rags, but they are tools for passing the time between chores, not the focus of your day. The innocence is fragile, easily shattered by the constant, blunt reality of survival. Your identity is forged early and brutally. You are a worker. Your value is in your contribution to the family unit, the extra hands that lighten the load, the extra mouth that, with luck and strength, will one day earn its keep and provide for the next generation. There is a melancholy irony in this. Children are desperately needed because so many die. Yet, those who survive are thrust into labor because resources are so scarce. The fear of scarcity shapes everything, including the definition of childhood itself. It is a biological imperative made starkly visible. Reproduce, work, survive. We in our modern age pour vast resources, endless attention, and years of protected dependency into our children. We build them worlds of play, education, and exploration, delaying their entry into the workforce for decades. Are we simply affording ourselves the luxury of abundance, a societal privilege that the medieval world could never dream of? Or is there a fundamental, hard-won shift in recognizing the inherent value of unburdened development. The preciousness of a mind allowed to wander before it is yoked. Ask yourself, would you trade the security and extended innocence of a modern childhood for the raw, dangerous, fleeting summer they knew, if survival was the only prize? You wake before dawn, the air biting cold, damp from last night's fog that clung to the thatched roof. It feels heavy, ominous. You know, without a calendar, what the weather might portend. A sharp, persistent wind from the north carries the threat of a late frost, a disaster that could blacken the emerging shoots in the field you've worked so hard to prepare. Your ancestors, stretching back further than anyone remembers, lived and died by the same rhythms, the same fears. Nature is not a pleasant view from a window. It is the wolf at the door, the bread on the table, the fever that takes a child. The success of your harvest, the very food that will fill your belly through the long winter, depends entirely on forces you cannot command or even truly understand scientifically. Too much rain, turning the fields to mud. Too little, leaving the earth cracked and barren. A sudden hailstorm can shred a season's work in minutes. You watch the clouds, the flight of birds, the stiffness in your joints. All are signs, messages from a powerful, indifferent world. Your survival requires an ancient, intuitive literacy of the earth and sky. A wisdom passed down not in books, but in calloused hands planting seeds, in tired eyes scanning the horizon. The forest looms at the edge of your village. It's essential, providing wood for fires, nuts and berries when the stores are low, maybe even a rabbit if you're lucky, and daring enough to risk the Lord's wrath for poaching. But it is also a place of deep, primal fear. Wolves stalk the deeper woods, sometimes venturing too close to the village perimeter. Bandits might lie in wait along the forest trails, and in the shadowed, twisted roots and whispering leaves, folk belief places older, darker things, spirits, malevolent fae, things that snatch the unwary. You wouldn't venture deep into the woods alone, especially after dark, for practical dangers as much as perceived ones. Hunger might drive you to its edge, but fear keeps you humble before its vastness. Your days are not dictated by clocks, but by the sun's arc. You rise with the first hint of light, work until it dips below the horizon, sleep through the deep darkness governed by the moon. There is a profound intimacy with this cycle, a constant negotiation with its power. You respect the river because it can flood, the mountain because it can send down rockfalls, the weather because it feeds you or starves you. There is no expectation of control, only adaptation, resilience, and prayer. Your faith is deeply intertwined with nature. Saints are invoked for good harvests, charms are used to ward off lightning, blessings are sought for the livestock upon which your life depends. It's a life lived in constant, vulnerable dialogue with the elemental forces of the world. Today, we build cities that cage the weather, divert rivers, and extract resources on a scale that would seem like sorcery. We live, for the most part, buffered, from nature's raw power. Ask yourself, when your survival doesn't depend on reading the clouds, watching the wind, or fearing the wolf at the forest's edge, what connection do you still feel to the natural world? Have we truly conquered nature, or merely distanced ourselves from its fundamental power, perhaps dangerously so? Their world was smaller, yes, but their understanding of its intricate, often terrifying balance was vast. You dip your hands into the cold stream, the water rushing past, blurring your reflection into an indistinct ripple. There is no mirror in your home, no polished glass to hold your own gaze. How would you even spend the time? Every hour is accounted for, claimed by the earth, the livestock, the relentless cycle of hunger and work. Your face, you see it mostly in the faces of others. Your reflection is not your own private image, but the collective gaze of your village. Here, who you are is not a question you ponder in solitude. It is a declaration made by your birth, your duties, your relationships. You are Tomas's daughter, known for your strong back in the fields. You are Elias's wife, expected to bear children and tend the hearth. You are a subject of the local lord, bound to his service and protection. Most profoundly, you are a child of God, living under divine watch, your life a brief, fragile tenancy before eternity. Your worth is inextricably linked to how well you embody these roles, how diligently you labor, how faithfully you adhere to the customs passed down through generations, how devoutly you follow the teachings of the priest. Individuality, as you might understand it today, the unique self, the journey of personal discovery, is a concept almost alien. There is little time, less inclination, and certainly no cultural framework for navel-gazing. Your expression comes not through personal style or unique opinions, but through the quiet strength of your endurance, the quality of your harvest, the number of healthy children you raise. These are the markers that matter. Your reputation, the sum of village gossip, the nods of approval or the sharp glances of disapproval, this is the closest thing you have to a personal identity. It is a fragile thing, built day by day on your actions and the perceptions of your neighbors. A moment of laziness spotted during the harvest, a sharp word overheard, a prayer missed. These small things become threads woven into the tapestry of who you are in the eyes of your community. You are not just yourself. You are a piece of the village, your identity, a function of its collective metabolism. This constant external validation, this social construction of the self, feels like the air you breathe. Consider the stark contrast. The modern world urges you inward, offering countless mirrors, physical, digital, psychological, to explore and define a solitary self. Has this intense focus on individuality gifted us authenticity, a truer understanding of who we are? Or have we sacrificed a vital connection to the collective fabric that once provided a shared, albeit externally defined, sense of belonging and purpose? How would you truly know who you were if the only reflection offered back was in the judging, knowing, and sometimes unforgiving eyes of your community? You wouldn't search within. You would look to them and see yourself defined by your place among them. Section 16. Simple hopes, enduring dreams. You stand at the edge of your field, watching the wind ripple through the unripe grain. The sun, for now, is generous, but the sky can turn cruel overnight. This field, this fragile stand of green against the vast, unpredictable world, is the canvas upon which your dreams are painted. They are not dreams of castles or crowns, of journeys across the distant sea, or chests overflowing with coin. Those are fantasies fit for storytellers, for lords who live lives you can barely imagine. Your dreams are tethered to the soil, to the breath in your lungs, to the blood that runs in your children's veins. Your greatest hope is simple, yet utterly vital: a good harvest. Enough grain to see your family through the long, hungry months of winter. Enough to pay the Lord his due without selling the coat from your back or the tools from your hand. A harvest that won't succumb to blight or flood, to early frost or devastating hail. It is a hope whispered into the dirt as you plant each seed, a prayer carried on the wind that rattles your window shutters. Next, you dream of healthy children, not merely many children, though numbers bring strength, but children who survive the treacherous passage from womb to world, who navigate the fevers and coughs that snatch so many infants away. Children with strong limbs to help in the fields, clear eyes to see the work before them, and the simple fortune to live long enough to bury you. They are your only insurance against a helpless old age, your only living legacy. The thought of their small bodies succumbing to sickness is a fear that lives permanently in your gut, a cold knot tightened by every cough in the night. You hope for strength, the enduring power in your back and arms to continue the grueling labor year after year. To lift the heavy plow, to swing the scythe, to haul water, to mend the roof, to grow old without your body betraying you, leaving you a burden to those you love most. You hope with fierce intensity for protection from famine that leaves bellies hollow and eyes vacant, from the plague that sweeps through like a vengeful god, from raiders who might appear like phantoms on the horizon. You light candles, you wear charms, you pray to saints, not out of idle custom, but because the threats are terrifyingly real, and hope demands action, even symbolic. Beneath all these earthly desires lies the deepest hope: salvation for your soul. The priests speak of heaven and hell, of judgment after death. You confess your sins, attend Mass when you can, strive to live a life acceptable to God. The promise of an afterlife free from suffering, of eternal peace, is a powerful beacon against the constant hardship of this life. It is a hope that transcends the physical, yet it is rooted in the very real fear of damnation, a fear as potent as the fear of hunger. Marriage, too, is less about romantic love as we understand it, and more about the hope for partnership in survival. A wife is a co-laborer, a mother to your children, a sharer of burdens. A husband offers protection, strength, and the means to raise a family. The hope is for a good match, a working alliance that strengthens both individuals against the odds. And the birth of a child, while fraught with peril for both mother and infant, is a raw, explosive moment of hope. A new life, a continuation, a potential future. It is a gamble you make with fate, fueled by an instinct older than any king or creed. Look at these hopes: harvest, health, strength, protection, salvation, family continuity. They are stripped bare of the layers of ambition that define modern dreams. There is no hope for self-fulfillment outside of the defined roles, no aspiration for individual success beyond the survival of the unit. Yet, they possess a raw, elemental power. They are the bedrock of resilience, the quiet engine that kept countless generations pushing forward through relentless difficulty. They show us the fundamental human capacity to look beyond the present suffering, to plan, however simply, for a better tomorrow, to find meaning in the most basic elements of existence. Ask yourself, if your world shrank to the essentials of food, shelter, and survival, what would you truly hope for? Is the shape of our dreams so different, or merely the packaging? You have walked a mile in the peasants' rough shoes, felt the ache in their back, tasted the thin gruel, seen the world through eyes that knew both deep faith and primal fear. Their life was a relentless negotiation with forces beyond their control. The capricious weather that decided between feast and famine, the demanding lord who could take field or freedom on a whim, the invisible hand of disease that struck without warning, the omnipresent specter of hunger that was a constant companion. Yet, amidst this struggle, they built communities bound by shared hardship, found fierce joy in simple moments, a successful harvest dance, a child's first steps, the warmth of a hearth fire on a bitter night. They held on to faith with a tenacity born of desperation and hope, praying to saints for protection, fearing the devil's shadow in every dark corner. They displayed an astonishing resilience, a quiet, unyielding determination that allowed humanity to survive and eventually thrive through centuries of turmoil. Their daily grind seems impossibly distant, a world of dirt, disease, and back-breaking labor we can barely imagine, a life where the smell of the stable was the smell of home, and a full belly was a miracle. But look closer. Haven't we just rebranded their struggles, given them new names and faces? The unpredictable weather becomes climate change and extreme weather events that threaten our infrastructure, our food supply, our very way of life. The demanding lord becomes the relentless pressure of mortgages, rents, economic systems that demand our labor, our waking hours, our very souls for survival in a different kind of manner. The primal fear of disease becomes the anxiety of pandemics, the crushing weight of healthcare costs, the dread of unseen threats. Hunger might be less acute for many in certain parts of the world, but food insecurity is a stark reality even today, a shadow that falls across millions of lives. Their faith in God and saints helped them navigate uncertainty, offering a framework for understanding a chaotic world, a hope for something better beyond the suffering. We, perhaps, turn to science for control, to self-help gurus for guidance, to political ideologies for belonging and purpose. Their community, forged in shared labor and mutual need, provided a safety net, an identity, a sense of belonging stronger than blood. We seek connection in online groups, in curated social media feeds, often feeling more isolated than ever amidst the digital noise. Have we truly evolved beyond the core human challenges, or merely changed the packaging, swapped the plague cart for the news cycle's death toll, the feudal lord for the indifferent corporation? The medieval peasant teaches us that resilience isn't about avoiding hardship, about living a life free from pain and fear. It is, fundamentally, about enduring it. It's about finding community in shared struggle, hope in the cyclical rhythm of life, the planting, the harvest, the brief rest before the struggle begins anew. It's about finding dignity in the simple, profound act of survival itself, year after brutal, beautiful year. They faced down the wolves at the door, both literal and metaphorical, the winter frost, the sudden raid, the sickness that claimed a child, with grit and an unyielding, quiet determination that echoed across the fields. They feared the devil's breath whispered on the wind, but still planted in hope, still prayed, still woke up each dawn to try again. What remains of them? Not monuments of stone, but the quiet capacity for endurance that whispers within us all. They had no legacy carved in stone, their names often lost to the dust of ages. But every seed they planted in hope, every furrow they plowed with aching hands, every prayer they whispered in terror, every simple meal they shared, built the world we now take for granted.